Hey, left, right, out. We're at the end of March 11th, Friday. Interesting stuff in the markets, real quick, just to go over them. I was looking this morning, and the markets are actually up, and they were not looking too bad. I think Putin come out and said something that there's some progress being made in the talks, but then that was quickly refuted by a Ukrainian spokesperson. And then late in the day, which in my mind, this is the way I think, who wants to go into the weekend with any kind of risk, right? Late into the day, we had the sell off, and the Dow closed like 230 basically. S&P's off 55, which I look at the S&P, look at percentage wise, 1.3%. Remember a long time ago, I was talking about that head and shoulders pattern. We're on the right side of that shoulder thing, and we kind of broke the neck at one time and then came up. I think we're going to end up, unless something really happens with this Russian thing, we're going to hit another leg down. That's just a personal opinion. I don't really, based off what I'm seeing, because we haven't even gotten, X the war out. We haven't even gotten into domestic issues when it comes to like what the Fed's going to have to do here. We just had another CPI number come up hotter than expected. But which, like I said, those are pricing pressures. Those, they are symptoms of inflation, but not necessarily inflation. Oh man, every time I get on here. But anyway, I wanted to get into something because now we're starting to hear a lot about, which we have over the years, cryptocurrencies, right? And my opinion on those, and then we might do a little bit more on the Russian thing. But first, let's get into this crypto issue, because there's a lot of Bitcoin proponents, a lot of people playing the crypto markets now. And I mean, myself personally, I've been in things like the Doge and the Shiba Inu stuff. Nothing spectacular, but I've made some money. I was in Shiba early, but I just didn't have, what is that? Just didn't have a whole lot of it. I made quite a bit off of whatever the little bit that I put in there, and then got out. If you've heard me before talk about what is on my hat, you heard me before. I've talked about crypto and kind of gone back and forth on it. And here's where my point of view of it is: crypto is a good way to to move money cross borders, right? Because you don't necessarily have the capabilities now lawfully or to move currency cross border, move even gold or silver. It's very hard. The government's made it that way through various acts and mechanisms of law. I'm not saying that, I don't justify that at all. I think that's atrocious, and they do it all in the name of whatever, protecting you against terrorism or drug cartel. But go talk to HBC about that anyway. Which is all the horse pucky, with a very little granular truth to that. And in fact, just like we've been warned, that is usually how they get the camel's nose under the tent, and the next thing you know, they're using it for Joe Blow over here to stop him from doing whatever. So anyway, so Bitcoin, let's take that for instance, because that's obviously the most popular one. Or you could essentially move untold amounts of cash, or I'd say purchasing power, across border lines by just memorizing a phrase and understanding and having a wallet, right? So I see the value in it. Here is where I've always been skeptical, and I've been kind of developing this idea of what the real intentions of this stuff is. Now, there's been a recent dude from the IMF. He looks like some kind of hamburger smuggler dude, kind of like a Jabba the Hutt, and he's talking about the controlling mechanisms of going to a digital currency. We also know FedCoin. We know there's China is coming up with their own stuff, and here's what a digital currency. Here's what really bothers me about this. All right, one, you've probably, if you're watching this, you've probably heard about how they can program certain things into smart contracts. Eventually, if this is a digital currency, that they can control what you spend things on. Basically, complete control of any kind of markets. Like you can only, for instance, you can only spend so X. They notice there's whatever shortage in X product, and now you're only allowed to spend X amount of dollar or Y amount of dollars on that. or you have wrong think and now you're not allowed to participate in some activity, right? Those are all interesting possibilities. And those are valid concerns, and I recognize them myself in exploring this topic, and that is a chief concern right there. And we've seen that same control mechanisms being applied to social media, to people that we call it wrong thing. Now that's what I'm going to call it instead of misinformation or whatever. But because a lot of this isn't misinformation, the real misinformation is coming from the alphabet networks, and now YouTube, Google, even DuckDuckGo. But so my chief concern here is coming from a military and law enforcement perspective, right? Which I look at it as and I've looked at this before. It's like, okay, well, you got a wallet, right? One of the chief um, selling points of this of cryptocurrency is the anonymity, right? But in fact, it's a ledger-based system. It's easy to look up. You can even filter for results, and I think the FBI is kind of starting to do this. But what you can do is by patterning I'm saying this is coming from my military law enforcement perspective. If I want to really profile someone, if I want to track somebody, if I want to stop what I was just talking about, being able to move funds across borders, being able to do any number of things. You can go infinitum on what I'm about to tell you. What I can do from that perspective is all I got to do is start patterning a certain wallet, right? And maybe somehow I can tie that to you, or maybe I'm looking for you, and I can pattern certain purchases or certain things, and I can get an idea of what your wallet is. And you can do this. I know it sounds out there, but anybody with a inquiring mind and the ability, or just even a small algorithm, or just you can just probably just pull it up and look at it yourself. You can end up finding interesting correlations between certain transactions and wallets. You can then niche it down to a certain person if you want to, and be able to track their transactions. And eventually, you would parlay that into the system where you start actually limiting people's various transactions. That is my chief concern with this: is the ability to profile people, to know what they're transacting. And here's where you're probably thinking is, well, don't we already have that through debit cards? And I'd say yes, in a sense we do. And this intermingling of corporate corporation and government and intel or law enforcement organizations is very precarious, and the ability to look into what you are doing is a violation of privacy. In a sense, that's my chief objection to the cryptocurrency. But what cryptocurrency has done is, right now we do have that mechanism, and it's displayed in Canada and a few other places where the banking system can turn people off. What the blockchain and FedCoin or whatever is going to do is allow that to be more efficient. It's going to take one more layer off of that for the ability to enact those type of draconian or tyrannical measures upon you. And the elimination of cash takes away that vent for you to be able to do that. And of course, they're going to allude to is cash as a mechanism for criminals, just like they're doing right now with Bitcoin, all in the while allowing it to innovate and create more and more social adoption of it, so they can move into their FedCoin, their government-backed digital currency. So I'm saying you need to transact in cash or gold and silver. You need to get into the untraceable stuff. That's my thing. If you're worried about the way the government is going, the governments in the West in particular. And while we're all watching things are going over 5,000-6,000 miles around the world, we need to be watching the thing that just happened in Canada, where they were able to switch people's banking accounts off. They were able to confiscate money. They were pretty much able to wipe you from existence. Confiscate money, I mean also assets, and sell them at will with no really day in court. And you don't think it's happened here in the States already. And the justification, the precedent's already been established throughout the early 2000s, throughout till today. And that's why in the early days, when people were warning about the abuses of allowing people to be indefinitely detained, allowing civil stuff that are along the lines of civil asset forfeiture and abuses of eminent domain. That's where it's important. You got to stand up for everybody based on principle, whether you agree with them or disagree with them. Because one day, if you don't stand up for those people aren't going to be there to stand up for you when this is turned around. And we're seeing that happen. So, like the people in the early 2000s that were okay with Guantanamo, they were okay with these people being indefinitely detained. Now that has turned 180, and you have people that would be aligned with those same people. But January 6th, people that are being detained well over a year, some of them don't even have charges against them. And then we also know, some of the other stuff that goes along with that. But I'm just saying that you got to be careful. You got to live by principle and as opposed to political ideology. Now let's go into the Ukraine thing, because actually, this whole digital currency thing is kind of tied into this a little bit, and that's the fact that all these sanctions. You're seeing a lot more bilateral agreements. You have Turkey coming out today saying they're not going to go along with the sanctions from the EU. They're going to trade with Russia in some other mechanism other than the dollar. India is doing the same thing. They have been, of course, China is. So we've pushed these countries in there. I think there's one other country that's aligned with them too. It eludes me right now, but the West is showing either by a weird conspiracy or by its own ignorance, helping drive the train off the dollar. Now, the interesting thing about that is not even the economic side of things, but just the backing of, just to think about the state of the economic situation from a strategic level. We don't produce hardly shit, all right? We could produce energy. We could produce a lot of things. We're not doing it to the greater sum of what we can do. While in the East, the manufacturing base, which has been developed there over the last, especially 20-something years, and in Russia with the natural resources, they actually produce and have the goods the natural resources to back any currency, not to mention their gold reserves, where we are just on a hope and a prayer over here at the last legs of this empire, in a sense. Now, take further along this Ukraine-Russia, because let's do some analysis. The Russians have been claiming, and they brought up to you about the biolabs. We've gone over that before, that those are actually true, and that this weird chick that keeps popping up all the way from the 2014 revolution in Ukraine, Victoria Nuland. She's been interviewed. She acknowledged this stuff. And it's interesting. Go look up that name. She's been in public service for a long time, and her names keep popping up in this Ukraine thing. But anyway, from a tactical perspective, the Russians have now encircled, I believe, Kiev almost completely. I mean, from the latest knowledge, of course, from the West, I cannot believe anything from our media anymore. So it's kind of like parsing through what you can strewn together. So when they say, like this dispersion of this convoy, all you can conclude is that it's encircling the rest of Kiev, and that they have that other northeast axis coming down, and they have that eastern part. Now that part's going to be on the front. That convoy is going to the western part, and they have. But it's a strange thing that the West keeps throwing out these stories, and sometimes I do say it's from the Ukrainians, and we've been lied to so many times here. But I've had to really look at this from a different perspective. I had to take a step back and really analyze what's going on here a little bit more. And from what I could tell is, it seems as though the Russians have really taken care about how they went in there. I know there's civilian casualties. Civilian casualties happen in war. But it could have been from the history of what we've seen from Russia and some of the way they deal with certain people they deem enemies. It seems as though they're being extremely soft over here, and it makes sense. And if you're just a layman, you don't understand the dynamics of Ukraine. I can understand how you could sit there and just eat up the Western propaganda, which it's sad to say it's there, and it might as well be state-sponsored entities, and they are in a sense. If you look at what we just come out with the COVID stuff, anyway, Putin would be soft-handed in the East because those are where most of the Russian sympathizers are. It would be more. You would see. It would lend credibility to the West if he was attacking the western part of Ukraine because you think, well, they're ethnically Ukrainians over there. They don't like, they don't speak Russian to the extent, and they're not really wanting to be part of Russia. And you could see how you could, oh, well, maybe there's some atrocities there. But on the eastern part, they're very sympathetic to Russia. In fact, if you really study, I know they keep saying in the Western that they took Crimea in 2014, but if you look at, they were voted in, there was not even a shot fired, they came in. But a lot of those, and the Donbass region, those provinces they are majority Russian, and they want to be part of Russia, right? So it doesn't make sense for him to bomb whatever medical facilities on purpose. Not to say that those things don't happen, because war is hell, war is confusion, it is chaos. But they have had some tremendous restraint, in my opinion, relatively. And I think that's done for a reason. And they are allowing civilians to go around and get out. But I've actually seen text messages from people that know people that are in there, Ukrainians, that they're being told, they're civilians, that they can't leave by their own Ukrainian military, even though the Russians are telling them we need to get the civilians out. So it's an interesting dynamic from what we're hearing from the West, right? So now I just can't believe anything that we say. I mean, I sympathize. I don't want any more bloodshed. I want to, there's innocent people out there that need to be saved, but I'm looking at it, from a whole nother perspective. Now, then there's been intel reports coming out that, one of the reasons Putin actually invaded is because turns out there was a massing of Ukrainian military on that eastern part of Ukraine, and supposedly in his thought, they were going to have a huge push into the separatist regions of Donbass, and that would lend a little bit of credibility to how the White House and them were actually right on one thing when they were talking about, hey, he's going to invade Ukraine, is because they probably knew that this was happening or is going to happen. It would trigger this event, and it appears to me that the West actually knew what was going on, and they knew this would trigger. This would be a red line for Putin. So why the only thing they've ever gotten right has been this, is that he would invade. So that's my interesting thought of the day with regards to that. But if you want to look into some certain things, you ought to go look at that documentary, Ukraine on Fire, by Stone, or Oliver Stone, I believe. And he's not a Putin apologist. In fact, he really questioned Putin in the 2016 about the election, but he did a really good documentary on that, and it really gives you a little more perspective on what goes on in Ukraine, because it's really funny how there are a lot of Nazi ties there, and how the left is now backing these same entities all of a sudden. But then also these other names like Victoria Nuland start popping up, who's still around today. And even though she's not the ambassador over there, she was during this time in the 13-14, I believe, but she is, and she has testified to some of the circumstances over there, even though she's not part of that group. She still is, what is she right now? She's a Undersecretary for Political Affairs as of April 2021. Also, another gentleman who was ambassador over there earlier, now he's in Greece, is this Jeffrey Pyatt. You'll see these guys' names come up a lot, and it seems like they've been in government for a long time. It seems like they have a lot of extensive knowledge, especially on the corruption. And if you look into this a little bit deeper, in 2000, I think it was 14, these are the guys that were caught on a conversation was leaked talking about the overthrow of the government over there. So anyway, interesting stuff you need to look into. There's a lot of bodies buried over there from Western politicians. And there's a reason why we're getting force-fed one message and we're not allowed to hear a different message, because they want us to think it's black and white one way or the other, where any of these things on this kind of scale, there's a lot of nuance to it. And it is interesting whether you want to defeat Putin or the Russian army, is you have to understand their train of thought. And that doesn't work out well with the way the West is set up. Its war machine is to get the populace on a track and get them to think one certain way, and that goes through psyops and propaganda operations. And while accusing, it's funny because Nuland under testimony is when they were bringing up the biolabs thing, was saying that the Russians typically accuse people of the same thing that they're doing, which it's oddly, if there's any kind of retrospection in any of these, especially on the left side, is they realize that that's the tactic that they use. Everything they accused, like Donald Trump or anybody else of doing, in fact, they were doing. And I don't know if it's actual tactic or they just think that people actually do the same thing that they do. I don't understand it, but so in fact, usually when they accuse somebody else, you better look at them because a lot of times they're the ones that are doing it. So right now they're accusing Russia of possible false flag biological chemical weapon. Why would Russia do that, especially on the eastern part of Ukraine, where the majority of the Russians speaking populace live and have Russian sympathies? Why would you guess? That's the same thing they said about Assad, who was winning a war, supposedly would gas his own people, which maybe he would if he was losing a war, but if he's winning the war and almost won, why would you go and put out some kind of why would you gas a bunch of people in order to bring international outrage? I mean, just so happens that there's NGOs that are involved in some of these things. Anyway, I'm going to leave you there because we're dragging on, but there's a lot of things that are going on in the world, and I'm really starting to, now that we have time to digest, you can pull back and kind of look and kind of just introspective on yourself, the way you're thinking about it, where you lied to, what's the truth, and then what's not congruent. And let's go in and let's really delve into that and see if there's some commonalities throughout history, recent history in this, and also anybody that stands to win or gain out of any of these recent events. But in anything that seems illogical, well, maybe there's a logical reason there, but that's being hidden from us. Anyway, left, right, out, like, subscribe, talk to you later. Peace.